Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans, as we are off and running now in the month of January. Mr. Jim Eichenhofer, Pelicans.com, second full week of the month of January. Hard to believe. Beginning of the month, we're talking about, 17 games in 31 days, and here we are, getting closer and closer to the midway point of this month.
Yeah, this month is flying by. I mean, I think this weekend was really encouraging. The fact that we saw just a lot better product on the court compared to what they've produced for, the first 30-plus games of the season. Now they're 40 games in. So I think it was a good weekend overall. It would have been an amazing weekend if that last shot at the buzzer would have been about a half inch closer to the where it bounced off the backboard. But nonetheless, I talked to a few people already this morning in the office here who were saying that was the most fun game that they've watched all season. It would have been really fun if it had been a win, but either way, it was a really good performance and encouraging. No doubt.
And when we last talked here on the podcast on Friday, we thought this 3-game East Coast swing was, it was daunting. It was challenging here a little bit. You hadn't played a very good basketball game, let's just be honest, on Wednesday against the Portland Trailblazers. So you were kind of interested to see what it went. And then, when I meet you at Loft 18 at our Pelicans watch party, we start our pregame with a nice visit with Andrew Lopez, but then also he opens his mouth and he goes, Herb Jones could be out for a while with the shoulder injury, Zion Williamson suspended, and you're going, oh my.
And you're not blaming Andrew Lopez for those things when you said he opened his mouth. Those things had happened and we were discussing them. Yeah, no, it was a really rough Friday afternoon. To hear those two pieces of news was a bad start to the weekend.
No doubt.
By the time we got to Sunday, things looked a lot better.
And part of the reason was because of this on the Pelicans Radio Network.
And now Oubre tries to drive, and Yves Missi says, "Get that shot out of here," as he blocks it all the way into our bench.
Missi with the delivery. Deliver us from Yves.
McCollum pops another three left to the top.
The president is cooking.
18 first quarter points for C.J. McCollum. Gordon one-on-one with J.R.E. Crosses him over, gets to the rim, throws it out right to Jose.
That's a good rotation by
GTA.
Jose reads the pass.
Jose to Hawkins, left wing three, buried it, made him right. McCollum, dump it down low. Yves, dunk it after a little double clutch. Steal by Alvarado. Up the floor, McCollum pulls up from the wing, right three. And down. Right corner, Martin drives into the rack, and he got blocked by Missi. And it was off of Martin. Are you kidding me? And McCollum begging for the ball. Get it into Murray. Murray, bounce feed to Boston. Boston drives to the paint. Bodied up, throw it up. No, rebound Yves and a putback. Kick it to Jose. Wide open left wing three. Swish!
Oh, make him right, President. Jose.
Three ball Jose. Swish, left wing is second in a row.
Jose.
Jose to the right block. Dump it off to Tice, another dunk.
There you go. You can hear the starters and the bench put in a lot of effort. I'll ask Jim specifically about what stood out in that, but here's head coach Willie Green.
It's a credit to all of our guys and the character in that locker room. Dealing with a lot the last couple days or so, and they pulled together and went out and competed for 48 minutes. Played hard, really solid defense, shared the ball offensively, all the things that we talk about, all of our concepts, and I'm extremely proud of this group.
1 point. That's all that stood between them winning all 4 quarters in that game. Jim, you and I talked about it during the game. 36 points off the bench, man. Just your thoughts on that performance that night.
Yeah, the last thing you mentioned, the bench, was the thing that I think stood out to me the most. Just the fact that you had 3 guys that had a double-figure scoring. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl didn't score in that game, but he had a bunch of rebounds and assists. So, just the contributions that they got from pretty much the entire rotation that game. And offensively as well, they scored. This was a little bit of a prelude to what they did Sunday, but they scored 123 points against Philly. So that was the most points they had scored in quite some time, other than one of the games against the Wizards, which we know that Washington is really struggling overall, as well as at the defensive end. So, it was one of the better offensive games that the Pelicans have had in several weeks, and that was a reason why they not only won the game relatively easily, but also it seemed like they had the lead for almost the entire game.
Yeah, no doubt. And then you get to Boston, and again, that's a very daunting task, and that's a team that, Jim, they're going to fire away threes. What did they average, 53s a game, something like that? I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Right.
So then here come the Pelicans, a team clearly known for their three-point shooting, and DeJounte Murray, 5 in the first quarter.
Zion, bounce pass to Murray. That is online and down from the left wing. Are you serious, DeJounte Murray?
Is this DeJounte Murray? Who is this shooting this basketball like this?
Don't wake up if you're sleeping.
I love that. And, of course, Zion Williamson, known as a person that loves to steal the basketball.
Bounce feed to Porzingis in the lane. Strip by Williamson again. Steal Z. Coast to coast. Lefty layup is good.
Z has come up with 3 steals
on consecutive possessions. 55-51.
And then, of course, as the game went on and on, the bench provided some stuff. You started seeing Zion look a little more like himself.
Got to quiet the crowd. Zion powers in. Scooping lefty layup right in Cornette's grill.
Now that looked like Zion Williamson.
See the body language, Z? He had the stomp back up the floor.
That looked like
Yep.
Z.
And Jim just mentioned how important Jose has been on this road trip so far.
Porzingis, watch out. Oh, he got stripped by McCollum. Back the other way, CJ.
You're not 2-on-1.
Leave it for Jose. Wide open left wing 3. Good!
And you don't need 2-on-1 if you got Jose in the trailer position.
Let me tell you something. Somebody else we're going to be talking about here as well. The play of Trey Murphy.
Trey's wide open.
Oh, that's a good screen.
Left angle 3.
That's a good screen.
It is down again for Trey Murphy.
Kenneth, the third benefits from that screen. I think it was Yves Missi, and he's wide open on the catch.
5 threes, 28 points.
That's great to hear, right, Jim? The screen for Missi showing the growth on that, and then Trey just continues to knock down shots.
You're down 3.
And Trey Murphy's got a 3.
Left angle 3, Trey. Front iron. Nope. Rebound White.
That's the shot you got to have. That's the shot you're looking for.
And we foul him in the backcourt.
Yeah.
Right, I'll take that. I thought that was for the tie. Misread it. Miss for the tie. So, Jim, look, obviously, just up and down those highlights. I cut 26 highlights on that one. So much went well yesterday and how they played before we get to the last play.
It was fun to hear the happiness in Graf's voice because I know it's been rare sometimes. We've had some stretches this year where he hasn't been able to sound that pleased with things. So yeah, it was great. I mean, there were so many highlights. You said 26 clips. I mean, that was just a fun game. I mean, it was definitely. I mean, it might have been a top 5 performance by the Pelicans this season, even though they didn't get the win.
I 100% agree. I think that's a great way to look at it. I mean, Jim, when you look at what they did, they were hitting their threes. You had guys that were making shots left and right. And I think one of the things that really stood out more than anything was, I asked you this already once. It was after one of the home games. I was like, man, this is one of those games you go, man, what if, right? Well, what if you didn't have those injuries and such? And you're seeing more and more of those examples, like, you're still not fully healthy, but you're pretty much everybody but B.I., right? And Herb Jones, right?
Jones, yep.
But as far as the scoring was, and you're seeing more of a rhythm. DeJounte Murray looks more and more comfortable on that court. And, dude, I know Yves isn't double-doubling statistically, but it sure feels like he's having a bigger impact in these games, huh?
Yeah, he is. I mean, I think what we're seeing, too, is it maybe, I don't have very much patience sometimes, and I mean, under the circumstances, I totally understand people not having patience with this season, but it does seem like I think to some degree we're seeing the guys. It's not just that you get the guys back from injury and then immediately they click in and everything's great. Sometimes it takes some time for them to get back into a rhythm. I know that was one thing people can go back and listen to Friday's episode. One thing Antonio Daniels talked about with DeJounte Murray was that he just needed time, and it seems like that's been the case with. I mean, it took CJ a little while to get back to the way he's played lately. It wasn't like, I think with a lot of these guys, it wasn't immediately in the first few games after they came back from injury, they look like themselves, which is to be expected when you're out as long as some of these players have been. I think we're seeing that a little bit with Zion too, that he's showing a lot of promising signs, but you can tell that he's not 100% yet, and it's going to take him a little bit of time. I mean, he's not playing his normal minutes either. He's played 28 minutes his first 2 games back from injury. So, I think that's a big part of it is just that you have so many players who not only were injured and came back from being out, but they were out for a long enough period where it's taken them a little time to get into a groove. But I think we're finally starting to see that combination come together, as well as just the chemistry. It seems like DeJounte's figuring out where guys need the ball in different spots. He's been making really good decisions as far as when to shoot, when to pass. And so everything just looks better. And so I think, they have 42 games left in the season. This is so much more watchable than what we saw for a lot of stretches of November and December. What they've done lately is it makes you want to tune in and watch. It makes you just a lot more optimistic about it. We know the record is what it is, and that it's going to be a tall order for them to get back in the play-in tournament race. But if they play like this, I just feel like it's just going to be a lot more entertaining and worth your while to pay attention down the last 3 months of the season.
You saw the comments on social media. People were happy with that performance and seeing it. And again, I think that's one thing. I can take a loss if the other team. Again, you have two All-NBA $350 million players in Tatum and Brown.
Sure.
That's who they are. So, and that's the team that won the championship. You're giving them that kind of game. Pretty much every other team in the NBA, you play like that, you're winning.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately, from a big picture standpoint, this season has been infinitely frustrating at times. But one of the things that we want to see is just them be a lot more representative of a competitive NBA team and a lot more representative of the talent that we know that they have. So, like you said, it stunk that they ended up losing the game by a point, and that would have been an incredible way to win a game at the buzzer, and just to be able to beat Boston no matter how you do it would have been a pretty memorable moment. It wouldn't have changed the overall scope or outlook of the season based on the standings, but it would have been extremely encouraging. But even without that basket, that shot by C.J. McCollum going in and bouncing off the rim, even without it, if you look at things objectively and from a reasonable standpoint, when you take a step back, you realize that, if they play like this the rest of the way, you're at least going to be able to go into the offseason saying we got back to playing the brand of basketball that we thought we were going to be able to put on the floor when they had training camp, and that a lot of individual players, I know we're probably going to get into this a little bit more soon, but just a lot of individual players are making jumps. And I think among the things that you have on your checklist of what you want to accomplish for the rest of the season, I think that's definitely near the top of the list.
No doubt. Here's Willie Green after the loss.
Yeah, I thought it was a good game. Game plan discipline was at a high level. The guys just they executed over and over again, and it came down to the wire. So, I think everyone on our team and with our group will take that shot again. It went in and out.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, that's hard work sometimes, right? But you're at least in that position because you've played hard to do that. I think that's the one thing that stood out in Zion's post-game comments.
We competed. Even when they went on their runs, we didn't let it affect us, and we stayed in the game, and we stuck to who we are.
All right, so Jim, look, we've seen better basketball as of late. As we now transition this to what are we seeing different here 13 days in the month of January that we haven't seen in the past?
Yeah, right now the Pelicans are 3-4 in January. That easily could have been a little bit better, obviously. But, in the 7 games I think we've seen, there's so many different areas where they've been improved. One of the things I want to start with is they're 5th in three-point makes per game in January. They actually outscored Boston last night in three-pointers made. So, that was something that was kind of like an impossible dream if you think about it before the game. It's
against
like
that team, yeah.
There's no way that they're going to be able to make more threes against Boston when they play them head-to-head. I think I wrote something in the pregame or in the preview yesterday morning about you just want to try to stay competitive. You want to just get within, a few baskets. If they outscore you by 9 or 12 points from three-point range, you can live with that. But it turned out that the Pelicans, made more threes than Boston did. It was 17-13. So, just another good sign of early in the season, the first couple months of the season, the Pelicans were at the very bottom of three-pointers made. I think they might have been 30th not that long ago. So for them to go all the way up to 5th, and granted, we always have to say it's a small sample, it's 7 games, but with the way that some certain individuals that I'm going to talk about in a second are playing, it's not that unheard of. It's not that out of the realm of possibility for them to make a big improvement, which they've done by being 5th in three-pointers made this month. They're also 9th in three-point attempts. And, we talked about how the goal this season is to take 43s a game. And depending on the personnel that's available, whether it's injuries, whether it's, Zion comes back, you think maybe they'll shoot less threes because you're playing lineups that have Zion and Yves Missi. Neither of those guys are going to be taking many, if any, threes. But in January, the Pelicans have actually averaged 39.9 threes a game, which is 9th in the league. So they're almost exactly at the 40 just in January. So I think that's something that the coaching staff has to be pleased with, the fact that they've, increased the amount of threes that they've taken. Clearly, it helps a lot to have CJ McCollum available now, have Trey Murphy available.
Yeah.
Those are guys that can
DeJounte even. He missed two first 2 months.
Guys that can take 10 or 12 threes by themselves in a game, and it's not like they're forcing anything. It's like, okay, we expect that. No one's going to complain if Trey Murphy takes 14 threes in a game. So, that's helped a lot as well. They're 12th in three-point percentage in January. So even though they've pretty significantly increased the volume and how many they're taking, they've also gotten more accurate from three-point range as well. I'm not going to go through all of these numbers, but just real quickly, they're 12th in free throws made per game in January. They're 11th in free throw attempts. Zion's only played in 2 games, but he helps a lot in that area. Pelicans are 5th in blocks per game. So defensively, that's something that has been a plus. Offensive rating, which is points per possession, they're 12th. They were in the bottom 2 or 3 for most of the season in offensive efficiency, so that has gone up a ton. Assist-to-turnover ratio, they're 10th. We know that they had a bunch of games where it was almost even. They had almost as many turnovers as they had assists.
Which, by the way, is not good.
No, that's not a good thing. So this month, their assist-to-turnover ratio is 2.14, so they're having obviously more than twice as many assists than turnovers. And then lastly, turnover percentage, they're 6th. We saw so many games where they'd get 20 plus turnovers, and just that would be a huge crucial reason why they didn't have a chance to win games. So now you're talking, they're in the top 10 and being able to take care of the ball. I think Jose Alvarado has made a difference in that lately with him being on the floor. So just all these different areas where through January they've been so much better than they were in November and December in particular. And so the result of that is that you're just a lot more competitive, and you put all that stuff together and you almost beat Boston on their home floor.
Yeah. Look, and I think one of the things that you bring up too is the Captain Obvious kind of thing. You need your players.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why those players are who they are. And I know CJ McCollum said it in the past too on one of the games where they didn't win late. We're like, hey, your 2 most highest paid players on the floor touch the ball. And even then, that was a game that they hadn't played together that long, right? I think it was like their first or second game with both of them back, with DeJounte back. And you're seeing the difference. You're seeing the difference of why we were so happy that DeJounte was joining this team. He's had some incredible passes and stuff. You're seeing the development of not only guys like Trey Murphy to their game and such, but Yves Missi, same thing as well, where I keep looking at that box score. I'm like, you sure it's not a double-double? Because, look, on one of those highlights I just played, Trey hits the 3, and you hear Todd say it was a great screen by Yves Missi. Those are things that maybe weren't being as executed as you would have liked early on in the year.
I think totally agree. You can't win in the NBA without talent. If you have a big talent deficit, the way the Pelicans did in some of the games early in the season when they had so many guys out. I remember the game in particular, the game they played at Oklahoma City. It was like, how are you going to overcome this when you have this many key guys out and the talent differential is so big that your margin, Willie Green has talked a lot about margin of error is small. That one, it was like smaller than like a needle pinhole. It was like you had to do everything right for 48 minutes to have a chance to win the game. So, but it's also, to me, it's not just getting the talent back. That's the most important thing, but also just having it not be so disjointed, where it feels like lately they did have a stretch of, 10, 12 games in a row where they were able to start the same guys every night, and it wasn't necessarily resulting in wins, but I think they were getting closer and closer to having good chemistry and being more competitive. And now that you added Zion back in recently, you added Jose back in relatively recently, now I think the talent is back, and the fact that it doesn't look so out of whack and confusing. I think because, like I said earlier, DeJounte has played more minutes with a lot of these guys, and you could say that about a bunch of players. Jose and Daniel Tice had some really good connections in the game Friday, and it's like there's all these different two-man combinations and lineups where they never had the opportunity to do some of the things that they've done lately because they were never together on the court. So it just feels like now that the familiarity that should happen is starting to kick in a little bit 40 games into the season. I feel like in the November, for example, we saw times where 15 games in the season, the Pelicans still looked like they had never played together because in a lot of cases they literally hadn't. Whereas some of these other teams that they played, like Cleveland stands out to me, OKC, 15 games in the season, they look like they played together for 2 or 3 years because they had. So I think that's definitely been something that's helpful lately, that you're finally just getting some more cohesiveness.
I don't want to be the Gussie downer here, right? But to your point that you're saying, you just gave me a handful of stats, a handful of players that are playing better, and those are all reasons why we're seeing better and competitive basketball. All right, so Herb Jones is gone for a little bit, if not for the season, right? So how does that affect plus or minus in terms of the team, in terms of their defense? Because, look, DeJounte Murray, I guess in the past, if he doesn't play, you lose a lot. And we saw at the beginning of the season, you saw a lot. But that was also because DeJounte Murray wasn't playing. DeJounte Murray had a couple of games ago, 5-6 steals. I mean,
sure. Yeah, he's had some huge steal numbers lately.
Zion Williamson, 5 steals yesterday. I mean, if that guy can pick that up. I thought Javonte Green played a nice game.
He did.
Yesterday as
Made
well.
some threes.
So I don't want to say this because this guy isn't, first team defense. But do the Pels have some players that can help survive the absence of Herb Jones on the defense?
I think so. I mean, they're going to miss Herb Jones a ton. I mean, I've talked about recently the plus-minus numbers when he's on the floor. It's kind of unmistakable, the impact that he makes. I think really what's going to happen is that it's going to be, we're going to see probably, compared to if Herb was playing, we're probably going to see more minutes from Trey Murphy. Maybe we'll see more minutes from Javonte Green. It did seem like Javonte for a little bit there wasn't playing much. His minutes had gone way down because you had more players available. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest impacts, is we're going to just see a little bit of a different combination of players that are available. But yeah, I mean, they're going to miss him for sure. There's no doubt that not having a first team all defensive guy. But like you said, DeJounte is playing now, and some of the other guys can hopefully make up for some of what they've done defensively. I mentioned a bunch of stats. That's one area that they still need to make more improvement, is at the defensive end. They've gotten better in January, but it's not a big jump from what it was. I mean, but it also doesn't help to play some of the teams that they played, like Boston, one of the best offensive teams in the league. So, but it's an area that they're going to have to kind of do by committee, I think, without Herb playing.
So, look, you gave us some stats that have shown as to why the Pels are playing a little bit better. How about individually? You seen some performances? You kind of heard me foreshadow a little bit on Trey Murphy, what he's been doing. Is he one of your eyes?
Yes, he's definitely on my list. I mean, he's played 4 games in January. He's averaged 25.8 points per game. He's actually, if you think about it, with how well C.J. McCollum has played lately, but Trey is actually still leading New Orleans in scoring average this month, so that says a lot right there. He's made all 19 of his free throws. He's averaged 4 3-pointers made per game. So, I mean, he's been huge. I think he's made another jump that is pretty evident that he's a different player than he was maybe even a month ago or a couple weeks ago, and definitely compared to the beginning of the season. So that's been great. C.J. McCollum in January has averaged 25.1 points per game. He's shooting 50% from the field, 44% from three-point range. He's getting closer and closer to his long-stated goal of that, by the end of the season, or I think he said within like 10 days he would be back to 40% from three-point range. So he's getting closer to that. DeJounte Murray just in January, he's averaging 18.4 points. He's shooting 45% from the field compared to he shot 38% in December. In January, he's averaging 5.9 rebounds, 8.0 assists, and only 3.1 turnovers per game. He's a point guard. He's going to have some turnovers. That's part of the equation. And then lastly, Zion's played the 2 games that he's played. He's averaged 4 steals. He has 8 total. To me, where effort and conditioning shows up the most for him, I think, when he's really right in those areas, it shows up on defense. He's really moving his feet. He's scrambling. He's been doing a great job of anticipating when a ball handler has turned his back to him, and all of a sudden he ambushes the guy and steals it from him. So I think that's that part has been really positive. One of the things that Antonio Daniels talked about on the TV broadcast last night was just Zion. It's hard to measure this, but he said, Zion makes a big difference in the team's confidence, basically, that when you have him out there, it just gives you a different degree, a different level of belief that, you can go into Boston and win that game. And clearly, offensively as well, he makes a huge difference in that he's, people always talk about gravity in basketball, that he's drawing a lot of attention from other defenses, and that's opening things up for the Pelicans overall. And last thing, too, for him, in the 2 games that he's played since he came back from his injury, the Pelicans have won his minutes by 12. They were +8 against Minnesota and then +4 against Boston last night. And now, I mentioned this before, I think last week, but now he's played 242 minutes over the course of this season, and the Pelicans are -2 in that stretch. So you're talking about a team that's 8-32 overall record, but if you look at just the minutes that Zion has played, they're really pretty much almost exactly a 500 team. So, I mean, if they were 500, we'd be talking about the play-in race every single episode of this show. We'd be talking about, they got to win this game and that. So it just kind of shows you just how much more competitive they've been when he's on the court and how much more they look like a team that could reach the postseason as opposed to a team that is really not in contention right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is what it is. You don't need you don't need like special glasses or need to know anything about basketball and just see. I mean, the guy just has a different kind of talent level than others, right? I mean, you just see that. I mean, from the 360 dunk when he first came back, a couple games ago on that Tuesday against the T-Wolves to, really to that point that you're saying yesterday where his offense wasn't there and that rhythm wasn't there, but he did other things in the game that kind of, got there. And look, I mean, late in that game, he throws a pass to that right corner that turns out to be a turnover on a fast break. Give it another week or so where he's in the flow, that's probably a spectacular finish one way, shape, or form. Sure. Because I mean it just stinks because we keep bringing up the what ifs, but it is what ifs. I mean, there's a reason that guy's one of the best players.
There definitely were a few things that happened in the last couple minutes of the game that if it goes a little bit different way, if you make a little bit better decision, maybe you win that game. Of course, Boston is saying the same thing, that they had a 5-second violation that was super crucial. They had a couple other mistakes. They missed 2 free throws in the last, 10, 15 seconds of the game, which was surprising. But, yeah, I mean, you're right. I think I talked about earlier how, guys that have been out from injury, they have to get their rhythm back physically. I think you're right. I think it's one of those things where, the more time that Zion has on the court, maybe some of those mistakes that he made he'll improve upon, and they won't be mistakes anymore.
Yeah, and Jim, let's see what happens as we continue the month of January. Now, for your favorite part of it, man, it's Monday already. Last week flew by. I don't know what day of the week it is. Huh?
It's funny though because when the Pelicans play on Sunday, a lot of times like I always say it's the first of 2 Mondays. So I know that doesn't sound great, but no, it's Monday, but it feels like the second Monday to me.
And this week, by the way, a carbon copy of last week in terms of when
they
this
played
team
a Sunday
plays.
road game. Yep.
Off Monday, back-to-back on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and a game on Friday, which we'll get to in a quick sec.
Well, it's a Monday. Thankfully, Jim is always our Friday. It's time for Mr. Eichenhofer to give his players of the week and a player to watch for this week. What you got, big guy?
Well, the player of the week, I think it's only right that I go with DeJounte Murray. I think the level of improvement that he's had warrants some special recognition. In the 4 games last week, he averaged 23 points, shot 50% from the field, 44% from three-point range, 6 rebounds a game, 6.3 assists, 2.5 steals. So, I mean, he's just brought his level of play up so much, and I think this is something that the way he's played lately, I mean, not just the last week, but just recently, going back a little ways, is what we expected from him, when the Pelicans traded for him in the offseason from Atlanta. So, tip of the cap to him. The player to watch this week, I'm going to go with Trey Murphy. And it's interesting, going back to mid-December, he's actually leading the Pelicans in scoring at 25.2 points per game. So, again, you think about how well C.J. McCollum has played over the last month or so, and yet Trey's actually averaging more points than C.J. is. It speaks to just how great offensively he's been. Mm-hmm. His shooting splits over that same span, 49% from the field, 42% from three, 95% from three-point range. So, I mean, he's a sliver away from being 50, 40, 90 over the last few weeks that he's played. This has been the best stretch of his career in terms of just offensive consistency. He hasn't dipped below, 16 or 18 points for quite a long span right now. So it was great to have him back in the lineup on Sunday against Boston, that he's going to be the player to watch. The games this week, they play at Chicago on Tuesday, home against Dallas Wednesday, home against Utah on Friday, and then they have a little bit of a break, no games on the weekend, and then they play Utah again the following Monday, which is January 20th. But, I mean, just the last couple of things, little quick injury update on the teams that the Pelicans are playing this week. Kobe White for the Bulls, who has had a couple big games against the Pelicans in the past, he was a DNP Sunday against the Kings, a game that Sacramento won and added to their winning streak. Dallas on Wednesday, they don't have Luka or Kyrie. Kyrie hasn't played since January 1st. Luka hasn't played since Christmas, so Pelicans are catching a little bit of a break with both of those guys being sidelined right now. And then lastly, the opponent Friday, Utah, they have too many recent DMPs for me to even mention. They had so many guys that didn't play Saturday in their most recent game against Phoenix. But Jordan Clarkson, I'll mention him. He's a six-man, really good scorer off the bench for them. He's out. He won't be playing for a week or two, so he won't be in that game. But they have a bunch of other players like Lauri Markkanen who didn't play Saturday and not sure what their status is going to be. Obviously, this is still 4 days from when Utah comes here, but they're definitely a team that will be monitoring their injury situation because they have numerous players that have contributed for that. John Collins is another guy. So we'll have to keep an eye on that to see what kind of Jazz team actually shows up here for the baseball series Friday and Monday. So bunch of different teams that also have some injury issues that the Pelicans are going to be facing this week.
You mentioned Dallas not having those two guys, kind of important. I mean, I know Najee's done pretty well, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure Najee thinks he can carry things. And actually, too, they've done a really good job of maintaining a decent record.
Well, I was going to say, last 10, they're 3-7. So, yeah. I guess the point I'm trying to make is,
I meant more recently.
No, right.
I mean, some of those losses of the 10 were actually before Kyrie was sidelined.
Right, and that's what I'm getting at, is that it affects you when you don't have your players, no matter the team. I mean, obviously, we saw with Phoenix, what would happen with them when they lost some players and, things of that nature. Look, that's why I think what OKC's done is pretty remarkable. 9-1 in their last 10. They finally lost their sixth game of the year. I think it was to Cleveland. They're 32-6 on top of first. Same thing with Cleveland. Man, they've only lost 5 games. They're 33-5, but they've stayed pretty healthy. I mean, when Cleveland, wasn't it last year? Like, it's time to blow up the team, fire the coach, and do. They were all injured,
which they actually did do. By the way, they did fire the coach.
It did,
but yeah, no.
It was injuries.
In terms
they've
of
been healthy.
Yeah, in terms of their main guys, they stuck with their 4 best players, and it's worked out extremely well. I mean, I talked a lot earlier in the episode about no patience. I mean, I think it's one of those things. I mean, Evan Mobley is a great example of no patience. People were saying like, "Oh, he's not making progress," and it's like, dude, this guy's still really early in his career. He comes back this season, makes a huge jump, is going to be an all-star. Darius Garland, same thing. He had tons of injuries last year, tons of things that affected him even when he was playing. He's improved a ton. And so you add that all up together and you have the team that they have at 33-5, which is one of the best starts in the history of the NBA. So, yeah, no, they I mean, the fact that they're 6 games in the loss column ahead of Boston is amazing if you think about that.
Right. So. That team that we saw yesterday. Look, and here's where we are here in New Orleans. We just want to see some competitive and good basketball. And we've seen that as of late. Jim brought up some numbers. Jim brought up some players that are starting to get into it. And look, around the corner, we could be seeing Brandon Ingram, return to the lineup and see how that goes. And that would add to it. So let's see. This week, as we mentioned, tomorrow we have the Bulls. Then at home against the Mavericks coming up. And as Jim said, the baseball series with the Jazz over the weekend. They don't go back on the road until the end of the month here. Memphis, Charlotte, and Toronto, and that's literally the last weekend or second to last weekend of January. So we'll be home for a little bit.
After the game at Chicago Tuesday, it's really a 4-game homestand.
Right.
I mean, they jump right into it with the back-to-back Wednesday against Dallas. But, yeah, Dallas, 2 games against Utah, and then the 1 against Milwaukee. So, I mean, they're going to have a bunch of chances in front of the home fans to play a lot better and try to hopefully carry over what they've done so far on this road trip back to the games in the Smoothie King Center. I mean, there's a lot of time left in the season. So, I mean, I think it's really important to continue to show what you've done, at least recently in the month of January, where you're just so much better team and so much more representative of what you can do as a group.
As always, appreciate the time, Mr. Jim Eichenhofer. Thank you so much. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Thanks, guys.
All right, and thank you for tuning us in on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.